Hello everyone, this is the video for Wednesday in which I will be going over the file that gives you a structural guideline for the latter half of the CRP, the qualitative research and then the conclusion. So take a second to pause this video and download that file if you haven't already, have it in front of you as you watch the rest. Okay, so let's start by talking about part 3 of the CRP, where you put your own qualitative research, which is either an interview or a survey. In theory, you could do both. I'm sure most groups will choose one or the other. But really, the purpose of this section is to fill in the blanks, really, that you were not able to answer in your lit review. So other people are out there doing research of their own, and hopefully that can answer a lot of the questions that you've had. But rarely can it answer all of the questions that we have about our research topic. So that's where your own work comes into play. You going out there and just asking real humans the questions that you have. So let's go through this file together here. Your qualitative research section should begin by explaining what sub-questions this part is designed to answer. So maybe there were questions that you were unable to answer in your lit review. Some of the sources didn't seem to be talking about a thing that you're interested in. Or maybe you had some questions that just seemed to lend themselves particularly to an interview or a survey. For example, maybe you had somebody in mind who you knew was an expert on erosion, or maybe you have a friend who's a doctor, a family friend who's a doctor, and you want to ask them about opioids or something like that. So that could be a reason why you saved those questions for this part of the paper too. So yeah, tell us what kind of research you're doing next. Did you decide to do an interview? Did you decide to do a survey, and why? And then tell me about your methodology. This is important. So how did you pick this person? How did you decide to target these people in your survey? Who are you targeting if you're doing a survey? So remember that that's really important. I've had people do surveys in the past and kind of just ask a whole bunch of random people without too much method, and then they don't really comment on who it is that's answering these questions. That plays a big role, right? If you're only getting people who are your own age, late teens, early 20s, answering your questions, that's going to be really different than if you had a bunch of middle-aged people answering your questions or a bunch of professionals answering your questions. So tell me how that plays a role in the information that you're gathering. And what is the medium? So are you doing this survey over text message? Are you doing this survey over Facebook? What might the constraints of that be? Maybe you're leaving a certain demographic out. For example, if you're doing things on social media as compared to some other method. Okay, and then if you did an interview, avoid a script. Follow all of those same good interview habits that you employed for your iSearch. Tell me the most salient points from the interview and the responses that your interviewee gave you, and then make sure that you're making an effort to relate it to the sources that you gathered in your lit review. I'll be impressed if I see you saying, my interviewee said this thing and that agreed with the source from earlier. So you're even synthesizing this part of the paper as well. And then if you did a survey, who took your survey, think about that demographic information. You can build a table if you want of responses if you chose to do multiple choice responses. If you had open-ended questions where people were allowed to just type their own response, you could maybe include a few of those and talk about those responses. Okay, and then here's a few just sort of checklist questions here. I'll let you read through those on your own. The last section of this paper before the works cited is the conclusion. And as always, you don't have to just call it conclusion. You can come up with a better name or a more descriptive name than that. So you've constructed answers to your sub-questions here, and just like in the iSearch, in your conclusion, you're trying to build an answer to the overall question. Remember that takes critical thinking, which is one of our learning outcomes, right? So you're moving past the point where you can just go ahead and research an answer to your overarching question into the point where your research questions in university are sophisticated and complicated, and you have to do the work of building that answer yourself based on all of the research that you've done. And you've already set this up in your thesis statement in the intro, right? Where you've already shared the answer to your overarching question. And again, that happened, later on in the draft stage. You may not have even got there. You may not have even drafted your thesis statement, and that's totally fine. Sometimes some of us like to do the thesis statement as the very last thing. And your conclusion should offer some kind of possible solution to this problem. So whether you chose the opioid addiction, or the erosion problem, or the school district problem, your group is coming up with some kind of proposal that might help this community out. And it doesn't have to be a perfect proposal. It doesn't have to be something that you could, in theory, actually go out and do, like if you wanted to. Just some kind of course of action that is informed by your research, and explain why this might help that community or help that person. Okay, and then your works cited. I'm starting to see some of your works cited drafts in some of the lit reviews you've shared with me. And I'm hoping that the annotated bibliography, if you were one of my 2 classes that did that, was helpful in encouraging you to get that step over with early. But I'm seeing good work cited so far, so that's good. Remember that the more, formal your research paper is, the more important having a impeccable works cited becomes, because it can kind of compromise the integrity of your research if you have errors that you could have easily fixed in your works cited. Okay, so our word of the day is sequester. Sequester. And we're all done.